All right, welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago, to the Now Morning Show here on CTT. It's just about 21 minutes after the hour of 6 o'clock, and we are talking to Renuka Anandjit. Thank you very much. We're talking to Renuka Anandjit, research assistant and PhD candidate at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at UA St. Augustine campus. And our focus is domestic violence. Unfortunately, we're starting off the morning talking about another woman killed. And we keep asking, even as we celebrated International Women's Day on Monday, why are we still experiencing these situations where women, children, are being killed violently? So let's welcome Ms. Anandjit to the show. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Natalie.
And how are you?
I am good. Happy to be up this very early.
Yeah. Listen, girl, we all know what it's like.
I know this.
We only do it because the people want us and need us to. But talk to us. Let's start with what we consider to be gender-based violence, because in my mind, I think a lot of time we think gender-based violence just includes women, but does it go beyond that?
Of course, gender-based violence, and it's in the name, gender, right? So it's not violence against women or violence against men, and gender-based violence affects everyone, women, men, non-binary persons, and vulnerable communities. And when we think about, a lot of times when we think about violence, the immediate image we conjure is physical violence, that actual act, but a lot of times we don't necessarily think about the verbal and the psychological, the economic violence. And a lot of women are trapped in situations because of their own economic vulnerabilities. They may have a job, but they can't sustain a home on their own. They themselves are having difficulty finding employment. So a lot of times they rely on their abusers, and they're trapped in situations because they're thinking about their own welfare, their own quality of life. But also for women who have children, these are some of the considerations that keep them there. So a lot of times when we think about violence against women and conversations go, why didn't she leave? It's not as straightforward as that. There are a lot of considerations that go into leaving, including resources and including support systems, because for a lot of women, they may not necessarily have support systems. And even those who have support systems, those support systems can't always help them. We recently heard a story about a woman. She had to hide from her own family because the abuser had access to all of her circles, and she was just in hiding for months. So when we think about these things, we have to think about it in a much broader sense than just what we know conventionally.
But let us talk about some of the points that you raised about economic violence. Are we finding that, especially right here in Trinidad and Tobago, that our prevalence of domestic violence or violence against women is driven by our economic circumstances or poorness or support systems or lack thereof?
Of course. Like I said, a lot of women are trapped because we don't necessarily have the means to leave. And even when we do, because women are disproportionately affected in the economic realm. So while we do have access to employment, we have to think about the types of employment that we have access to. We're still in a pandemic, and women were the most hardest hit. A lot of women were laid off, and some of them who had to leave abusive relationships and try to find jobs during a pandemic, they could not. We had an assignment, because I also teach Intro to Women's Studies, and we had an assignment where the students had to go to and interview women just to hear about their own COVID stories. And one of the most striking stories was a woman who left her abusive relationship, and she was living basically in a community center, in a little room in a community center with her young child. So these
I think I saw that story. I saw a woman living in a pavilion with her child. A sports pavilion, which was, in my mind, was just crazy. But here she was, found herself in these circumstances and was just trying to make a way and to try to be safe at the same time. But what are some of the recipes for domestic violence? Because we talk about the lack of support system or the economic, the lack of economic empowerment for a lot of these women. But what are some of the other things that goes into making, getting from being safe, being okay, to ended up being in a domestic violence situation?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think we have to go broad. We just have to go right back to the beginning. What are we teaching our children? We live in a culture that cultivates violence, the way we speak, our music, just the way we interact. Those things have violent connotations and undertones. So when we're surrounded by it, it is completely normalized. So sometimes we ourselves are disconnected from it. And we see that a lot of times in the responses when you to reports of domestic violence. So we have to think about how we're socializing our children. We have to think about how when we're raising them, we ourselves, we're beating them, we are reprimanding them harshly. We're not explaining to them. We don't have a culture where we reprimand children and we tell them why you're being disciplined. And a lot of times we just lash out and
Yeah.
we punish them. And then these are the behaviors that they reproduce, and they reproduce it among each other as they're growing up. And then we reproduce them as adults. And for a lot of us, it's unlearning a lot of behaviors. And that's where the difficulty lies, because it's hard to unlearn years and years and years of just conditioning. And even sometimes for us, for myself as an activist, I don't believe in violence, but sometimes you'll have just a knee-jerk reaction, almost like a visceral reaction to
Yeah.
certain situations. And that in itself, it's just to be constantly aware. But again, it comes essentially down to how we socialize, the things that we are exposed to, how we speak to each other, and just media content. There's a lot going on in the media, social media, what we're reading, the videos we're watching, the music we're listening to. And these may sound like, things we've heard time and time again, but that's the reality
They're
in which we live.
influencers.
Of course,
They
of
do,
course,
and not only do they influence, they also reflect
of
who we
course,
are as a
of
people.
course,
So
of
it's like
course.
a double-edged sword. You have
Yes.
the influence on one side and you have the reflection on the other side. So where do you really go? But let's
Right.
talk about how we're socialized, because we talk about how we socialize girls as compared to how we socialize boys. What is missing in that socialization, especially for the boys? Because when we look at gender-based violence, it's not that it can't be towards a male, but
Right.
our reality is that most of the time the perpetrator is a male and the victim is female. Yeah?
Yes.
So what are we doing in terms of socializing our men that we need to change?
I think sometimes we allow them too many freedoms. And I say that in a way that as boys are growing up, they are allowed to go roam free. They can come in by 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, they can come in evenings. They have a lot more freedom. They have a lot more leeway. And us, and as parents, a lot of us have to acknowledge our responsibility in doing that, because there's this guy and he's saying that says, tie your heifer when I lose my bull. It's putting the onus on women to protect themselves, because once the boy goes out there, he's free to do what he wants as opposed to the girls. And then also as girls age, we tend to confine them more, because now as you're aging, you're maturing, you yourself are becoming, you become something to be consumed,
Yeah.
and we overprotect it. So when we give our boys all of these freedoms and then we protect our girls in this way, we are telling boys that it is okay to do what you want. It is okay to feel entitled to women's bodies, and to say and do what you want with free of repercussions. And that in itself contributes quite significantly towards enabling male attitudes. And also just how we engage with them. Sometimes, if catcalling, let's use catcalling for example. Sometimes men will catcall you down the street, and if you say something and you reject them, they lash out at you. And that in itself prevents some women from saying some things. So there's also a culture of fear where we are very scared of men
Yeah.
and what they are capable of. And a lot of times, people say not all men, but men as an institution is a little scary when we think about them as a collective and what they
Yeah.
represent.
And you said that that really is scary if we're to really look at men as an institution and what that might represent for many of us. But going forward, how do we fix the problem? How do we safeguard ourselves? As you said, somehow we seem to make it the onus is on women to protect ourselves, but the reality is that we are being attacked, and we're being attacked whether physically, emotionally, economically. How can we safeguard ourselves?
Well, that's the thing, Natalie. It's always about how can we safeguard ourselves, and everybody puts the onus on us
Yeah.
as women, and a lot of times women can do more than we are already doing. We have been speaking up for decades. A lot of the work around legislative change, a lot of the activism has been really advanced because of the women's movement, because of the demands that have been made by civil society, and that continue to be made by civil society organizations. And also we have to think about, again, I'll come back to the point, how we socialize our boys, because we have to think about what are we teaching them. If we're teaching them proper attitudes and behaviors, then they will not reproduce it.
No,
so
Miss Anandjit,
yes.
unfortunately, I don't know where the time goes. We have about 2 minutes left. But one of the things I always say is, it starts in the homes. And I've had disagreements with people about this, because people talk about the church and the schools and teachers, but I believe that they are supposed to be support systems, but not the mechanism, not the way for us to be cultured and groomed.
Yes.
So we obviously are having issues with family then, and family structure. So what can we change about the family and about the structure to ensure that we grow better children, better males, better females who are cultured differently?
Yes, thanks. We have to really think about gender roles, how we are assigning gender roles. What responsibility are we putting on our boys? What responsibilities are we putting on our girls, or lack thereof? And how are we teaching them? Are we teaching girls to serve? Are we teaching them to say that you belong in the home, you should be nurturing, whereas men should be going out there and earning and so? And it's 2021, but we still have these issues of the sexual division of labor, where there are male roles in the home and female roles in the home, and children learn that, and then they reproduce that, and that in itself lends itself to violence too, because if they're learned behaviors and then they're going out and they're compounded, you talk about the religious institutions, they're compounded by what is being learned in school, what is being learned in the church, what is out there culturally. So it's quite multi-layered, it's quite complex. Yeah. But it's not a standalone solution. It has to happen at multiple levels.
Final question: what's the role of the state? What role can the state play in this to help to safeguard us as people?
Oh, well, a lot. Of course, you have to ensure that there is public policy that meets the needs of your citizens. And that includes there's the Alliance for State Action that the IGDS is a part of. And we've issued 6 calls and demands, and the most recent after Andrea Barrett and Ashanti Riley. And that includes make changes to the public transportation system. We don't have a proper transportation body. The state can introduce that. I know it's in the works, but we're not sure what the status of that is. Even thinking about accountability and transparency, thinking about investing resources in shelters, in the GBV unit, in state institutions that work in around gender-based violence, and also think about a social fund and also a multi-stakeholder coordination mechanisms that include civil society. So you cannot have state actors alone making these decisions. You have to include organizations and individuals who are on the ground, who are doing the work. And of course, social reformation programs, always to really push for that cultural change and teaching nonviolence and communication and really introducing that maybe into schools and social services and such.
Yeah, but we obviously have an uphill battle, and you say it's so layered. It's so layered to treat with this issue. It's definitely complex. But for today, for the woman who has to go down the street, again, I know it's not supposed to be the solution, but what can I do? What can I do when I leave here today to ensure that I don't become a statistics?
Well, individual action counts, and the students of IGDS Ignite, we have launched Write Your MP campaign, which is ongoing, and you can find it on our social media pages, IGDS Ignite, or in our Linktree, Linktree /IGDS Ignite. And what the campaign really does, it has provided you with letter templates, email and mailing addresses for your members of parliament, and also even general suggestions on issues that you can write to around gender-based violence, because individual action works, and your MPs are there to serve you. So this is one strong action. So outside of protests, outside of vigils, outside of social media, this is a way you can take direct action and directly engage your MP to make that change and make that demand of them, because they are accountable to us as citizens and residents of Trinidad and Tobago.
Renuka, Anandjit, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us this morning. Definitely appreciated.
Have a good day.
Renuka Anandjit there from the Institute of Gender at the University of the West Indies, and she's saying we have to culture our children differently, because at the root cause of this is the family structure. We take that break and we'll be back with you shortly.